new national anthem bill that would restrict free expression. Anson Chan, the former Hong Kong Chief Secretary and Legislative Council member, recently offered this insight, and I quote, "If only Beijing would understand what makes Hong Kong tick, what are the values we hold dear, then they can use that energy to benefit both China and Hong Kong. Instead, they have this mentality of control," end quote. While the protests were sparked by concerns about the extradition bill, the heart of the discontent is that Hong Kong's political leaders do not represent and are not accountable to the people. Instead, Hong Kong's leaders are beholden to the Chinese government. Millions of people would not have to protest in the streets if they could freely choose their political leaders. I hope the Chinese government would understand that stability and prosperity can be achieved if Hong Kong's autonomy is respected and if the Chief Executive and Legislative Council members were elected without Chinese influence over candidate selection. In light of the continuing erosion of Hong Kong's autonomy and the recent violence against peaceful protesters, I believe it is time for the United States to reconsider its policies toward Hong Kong. U.S.-Hong Kong relations are governed by the U.S.-Hong Kong Policy Act of 1992 that commits the United States to treating Hong Kong as a separate customs territory from the rest of China, so long as Hong Kong remains sufficiently autonomous. I'm proud to support H.R. 3289, the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act sponsored by Senator Rubio and Congressman Smith. The legislation would require the Secretary of State to certify on an annual basis that Hong Kong is sufficiently autonomous in order to justify special economic, financial, and trade treatment different from mainland China under U.S. law. It is time we put the Chinese government on annual notice that further erosion of autonomy or a crackdown in Hong Kong will cause the city, and by extension mainland China, to lose its special economic and trade arrangement with the United States. Over the years, Hong Kong has prospered and become the financial center of Asia because of its strong commitment to the rule of law, good governance, human rights, and an open economic system. The erosion of this unique system threatens not only the people who attempt to speak out, but the economic vitality of the city itself. So to be clear, we stand together with the people of Hong Kong and indeed all the people of China when we express our concerns about the human rights violations of the Hong Kong and Chinese governments. Our focus today is doing right by the people of Hong Kong as they seek a democratic future that protects Hong Kong's autonomy and rule of law. And at this point, I'd like to yield to the co-chair, Senator Rubio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this important hearing, for your willingness to host it here in the Senate side.
Kind of nice over here.
It's quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little different pace. We had 4 votes yesterday. Today people will be exhausted.
Yeah.
But anyway, I want to thank you for doing this. I look forward to our continued partnership on this commission, and particularly as it relates to this topic. I also want to thank all of our witnesses, especially those who are on the front lines and have even been jailed multiple times, and we'll hear from them today about the things that have been done against them. And your commitment to freedom and democracy is inspiring. It really is inspiring for those of us who live in this republic. It reminds us of why so many of us serve here and what we seek to preserve around the world, and that's why we want to stand with you. Your fight and the fight of your fellow Hong Kongers is the fight of every human who yearns for liberty and dignity and demands that their fundamental rights be respected and be upheld. Let me say at the outset to the people of Hong Kong, we stand with you, and by we I mean this is a bicameral, bipartisan commitment, as you will see today and have seen in the past few days on these efforts across both political parties and every major figure. And not only that, but many Americans stand with you in your fight to keep your long-cherished freedoms. It was only a few months ago in May that we held a hearing on Hong Kong. It was titled "Hong Kong's Future in the Balance, Eroding Autonomy and Challenges to Human Rights." At that hearing, and even before, it was highlighted on the facts that the Chinese Communist Party has been eroding Hong Kong's autonomy and freedoms guaranteed by the Joint Declaration and by the Basic Law. The May hearing discussed the extradition bill that, if it would have passed, would have exposed everyone in Hong Kong, and that includes, by the way, 80,000 Americans who reside there, would have exposed them to the justice system, or the so-called justice system of the Chinese Communist Party. The same justice system that routinely tortures those in its custody, that denies critically needed medical care, that arrests lawyers for serving their clients, and that places the desires of the Communist Party above every and any demand for justice. The proposed bill exposed the very real and increasing threat to to Hong Kong's autonomy, but few of us could have anticipated the events that would follow. Since June, the people of Hong Kong have bravely taken to the streets for 15 straight weeks in more than 400 separate demonstrations involving more than 8 million people of every age and every background. Recently, there have been very credible reports that have emerged of the police's brutal treatment of demonstrators while in their custody. This weekend, for example, we saw images of the police holding down a protester whose head was bleeding and spraying into the wound on the head pepper spray, which is an act of total cruelty. We watched the police throw tear gas grenades at journalists, many of whom were far away from the demonstrators. Since the 21st of July, pro-Beijing thugs associated with organized crime and the party's United Front activities have violently confronted demonstrators and journalists and innocent passerbys, and the police just looked on, looked the other way, and in some cases even cooperated. And while detained demonstrators have been beaten or their faces smashed into the concrete, journalists have photographed these same thugs in detention, quote unquote, smoking and playing on their cell phones after attacking journalists and demonstrators. Although Hong Kong's chief executive may have promised to withdraw the extradition bill when the Legislative Council reconvenes in October, the government's violent response to the demonstrations demands accountability. And yet, Lam and the Hong Kong government refuses to press for any accountability for the violence by Hong Kong security forces that was committed and continues to be committed against peaceful protesters. The chief executive did not listen to the outcry against the bill in Hong Kong since its introduction, rather tried to ram it through the legislature. So what's at stake? The Hong Kong government's stubbornness in the face of public outcry has launched one of the greatest people power movements we have witnessed in recent memory. The actions of the government and the people demonstrate that there are two Hong Kongs. The Hong Kong of the government, totally leveraged by the Chinese government, has proven that it is not committed to a free and autonomous future for Hong Kong, nor is it one of rule of law or of justice. The other Hong Kong, the real one, is the one of its people, the students and youth activists, artists, journalists, doctors and nurses, lawyers, accountants, business people, from every walk of life, the city's people of all ages who have shown us a Hong Kong with a vibrant civic life, prepared to stand up for its own autonomy, democracy, and liberty. It is clear that these two very different Hong Kongs are colliding, and therefore the city is at a crossroad. The fact of the matter is maintaining Hong Kong's autonomy is critical to U.S. interests, and it also has real implications for the United States and for the rest of the world. Hong Kong's status as an international trade and investment hub are just as threatened as long as the long-cherished freedoms of the Hong Kong people are being threatened. Threatened, by the way, not by us, but by the Communist Party of China. So it is my belief that it's long overdue for the United States and the free world to respond. I hope we quickly pass the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which I hope will be heard next week in committee, so that we can provide this and future administrations with updated tools to respond robustly and flexibly to the Chinese Communist Party and its proxies who are undermining Hong Kong's autonomy. The U.S. government and other democracies need to hold Chinese and Hong Kong officials accountable for their failure to uphold their commitments. The United States and other nations have options precisely because Beijing benefits from Hong Kong's special status, a special status which has made Hong Kong an international financial center, built on the promises that China made to the world with regards to Hong Kong, which they now seek to break. China's leaders must either respect Hong Kong's autonomy or know that their escalating aggression will lead them to face real consequences, not just from the United States, but from the free world. And I issue one final warning of this regard. I anticipate fully that they will continue their work to turn the system of government in Hong Kong to resemble more like the one that exists in Macau, one that allows them to intervene in the legal system as they wish. So we're here today to examine what has happened, to look forward to Hong Kong's future. There are many challenges in our relationship with China, but Hong Kong must remain a priority. Hong Kong is not a Chinese internal affair, and the world has a responsibility to help the people of Hong Kong move towards a future that protects their individual freedoms and provides for civic well-being. And so I look forward to hearing your views and today's discussion. And I thank you for your courage and for your commitment.
Thank you very much. And let me just emphasize one thing Senator Rubio said. We represent up here on this commission a diverse political spectrum, from the left and to the right and everything in between. and we have lots of differences on lots of issues. We probably couldn't even agree on what to have for lunch, but we do have one thing in common, and that is we believe that your cause is noble and just, and we are honored that you are all here today. So we want to welcome this distinguished panel. I will introduce each one of them, and then we will go to testimony. You want to do? Okay, all right. We'll yield to Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. And what a panel of heroes, the best and the bravest and the brightest. Thank you for being here and bearing witness to a very ugly truth as to what Hong Kong is doing. It has been a long, hot summer in Hong Kong, as we all know. The inspiring and courageous protests there are a daily reminder of the stark differences between free and authoritarian societies. The people of Hong Kong have shown the world that a free people will not accept the boot of repression without protest.
I say frame it.
The millions of Hong Kong protesters have also done the world a great service. They have exposed Beijing's plan to erode freedoms guaranteed to the people of Hong Kong by international treaty. They have exposed Beijing's pernicious and repressive behavior. And make no doubt about it, the Chinese government is both uniquely repressive and incredibly paranoid about maintaining its grip on power. Today, there are over 1 million Uyghurs interned in Orwellian political education camps. Human rights lawyers have disappeared and been horribly tortured in detention. Christians, Tibetans, and labor activists and journalists as well face egregious abuse in the most intrusive system of surveillance operating in the world today. Why would anyone want their political fate determined by Beijing? If given a choice, no one would. As inspiring as the protests have been, they have also raised serious concerns about the actions of the Hong Kong and Chinese Communist government. The violence and the use of force perpetrated against the protesters by thugs and police, I repeat myself, is extremely alarming. Representative McGovern and I were the first members of Congress to call on the Trump administration to suspend the sale of tear gas, rubber bullets, pepper spray, and other crowd control equipment to the Hong Kong police. And I agree with him. We need to quickly pass the PROTECT Act that we introduced last week. Also alarming are the repeated and irresponsible threats of intervention made by Chinese officials, particularly given that this year marks the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. The Hong Kong and Chinese governments are alone responsible for the grievance expressed by the protesters, and they alone can peacefully end the protests by addressing the demands for universal suffrage and investigation of police threats. Blaming the United States government and blaming the U.S. Congress for the protests is an act of cowardly propaganda and not befitting of a nation such as China, which has aspirations of global leadership. It is time for the U.S. policy to respond to Beijing's long-term ambitions in the Hong Kong and pass the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. 5 years ago, Mr. Chairman, I introduced the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act with my CE co-chair, Senator Brown. The bill allows for a more robust U.S. response to the steady erosion of Hong Kong's autonomy and human rights. Over the years, Senator Rubio and I have upgraded the bill, and you as well, to reflect the kidnapping of booksellers, the disqualification of elected lawmakers, the political prosecutions of Joshua Wong, Nathan Law, Benny Tai, and others. However, every single time we pushed for passage, there was opposition from the diplomats, the so-called experts, the committee chairs in both the House and the Senate, and the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. We were told not to upset the status quo. We were told that upgrading U.S. policy would undermine their efforts with Beijing and its hand-selected political leaders in Hong Kong. We were told that our bill would cost U.S. businesses. It is the exact same advice that we have been hearing on China since Tiananmen Square, and the big issue was then MFN. China experts have failed the American people, and their advice helped to gut parts of our own economy. Their advice this time will fail the people of Hong Kong as well. Specifically, Mr. Chairman, as you know, the bill directs the Secretary of State to certify to Congress annually whether Hong Kong continues to deserve special treatment under U.S. law from mainland China that is different from mainland China in such matters as trade, customs, sanctions enforcement, law enforcement cooperation, and protection of human rights and the rule of law. It directs the State Department not, I say not, to deny entry visas based on an applicant's arrest or detention for participating in nonviolent protest activities in Hong Kong. It requires an annual report from the Commerce Department on whether the Hong Kong government adequately enforces U.S. export controls and sanctions laws. It requires the Secretary of State to submit a strategy to Congress to protect U.S. citizens and businesses in Hong Kong from the erosion of autonomy and the rule of law because of actions taken by the Chinese Communist government. Requires the President to identify and sanction persons in Hong Kong or in mainland China responsible for the erosion of Hong Kong's autonomy and serious abuses of human rights. We have wide agreement for this legislation. It is time that it passed. I've heard it said that the business of Hong Kong is business. I believe it's clear that the business of Hong Kong is freedom. The people of Hong Kong are working to protect the rights and rule of law that are the foundation of the city's prosperity and unique vitality. This commission and so many of our colleagues in both the House and the Senate stand united with the people of Hong Kong and will not be silent in the face of threats to their continued liberties, guaranteed liberties, and way of life. The U.S. and the international community cannot be silent or just make noise with nothing that backs it up. The whole world has a stake in a peaceful and just resolution of Hong Kong's and the survival of the one country, two systems model. Hong Kong people, ya yo. Yield back.
Thank you. Thank you. I am proud now to introduce our esteemed panel of expert witnesses this morning. Three of our witnesses traveled all the way from Hong Kong to provide their testimony to this Congress. The panel includes Joshua Wong, a pro-democracy activist and the Secretary General of Demosisto. At the age of 15, he organized protests against patriotic education in Hong Kong. Subsequently, he rose to prominence as a core leader of the 2014 Umbrella Movement. Mr. Wong was also one of Hong Kong's first 3 political prisoners since 1997, sentenced in 2018 with Nathan Law and Alex Chow for leadership roles in the Umbrella Movement. Most recently, he was arrested in August 2019 for his role in a peaceful protest outside police headquarters during the anti-extradition bill movement. Denise Ho, a pro-democracy and LGBTQ rights activist and an award-winning Hong Kong-based singer, producer, and actress. Ms. Ho is a prominent supporter of the anti-extradition bill protests in Hong Kong and a leading figure in Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement. She was arrested during the 2014 Umbrella Movement for taking part in nonviolent protests. The Chinese government has banned her from performing in China, and in July 2019, Ms. Ho addressed the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva on Hong Kong, during which she was repeatedly interrupted by the Chinese delegation. Sunny Zheng, a spokesperson for the Hong Kong Higher Education International Affairs Delegation, and an activist from the Student Union of the University of Hong Kong. Established in July 2019, HKIAD includes all student unions of universities in Hong Kong with the primary mission of raising global awareness and support for Hong Kong's anti-extradition bill protesters and the pro-democracy movement. Mr. Zheng has participated in and organized exchange events and conferences in Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, United States, and United Nations, and he recently gave a speech in the UK House of Commons in support of Hong Kong. Sharon Home, the Executive Director of Human Rights in China, where she leads its international advocacy and strategic policy engagement with NGOs, governments, and multi-stakeholder initiatives. HRIC has covered human rights and democracy development in Hong Kong extensively, including the 2014 Umbrella Movement. Ms. Home has presented in numerous hearings on a wide range of human rights issues before key European, U.S., and international policymakers. She is a professor of law emerita at the City University of New York School of Law and has taught law for 18 years, including training judges, lawyers, and law teachers at 8 law schools in China. Daniel Garrett, a PhD, an author, photographer, and political scientist focusing on Chinese security, politics, and securitization of Hong Kong. Since 2011, he has documented over 600 demonstrations, marches, and rallies in Hong Kong, including most recently the anti-extradition bill demonstrations. Dr. Garrett is a doctoral graduate of City University of Hong Kong with over 20 years of engagement with Hong Kong and completed his dissertation on one country, two systems under China's national security framework. Dr. Garrett was a career national security professional providing strategic counterintelligence, threat analysis, and served at the Defense Intelligence Agency, National Security Agency, and in the United States Air Force. So I want to thank you all for being here. We are honored by your presence, and we will begin with you, Mr. Wong.
Good morning, Chairman McGovern, Co-Chairman Rubio, and members of this commission. It's an honor to be invited back to Capitol Hill to speak about developments in Hong Kong. You may recall that I last traveled to Washington more than 2 years ago and testified before this commission in this same building on May 3rd of 2017. While I said back then, Hong Kong's one country, two system was becoming one country, one and a half system. I don't think there's any doubt among observers who have followed recent events. Today, we are approaching dangerously close to one country, one system. The present state of affairs reflects Beijing's inability to understand, let alone govern, a free society. The ongoing demonstration began on June 9th, when 1 million Hong Kongers took to the street in protest of proposed legislation that will have allowed criminal suspects to be extradited from Hong Kong to China, where there are no guarantees of the rule of law. Still, before the night have ended, Chief Executive Carrie Lam announced the bill's reading would assume and resume in 3 days. Hong Kongers were preparing for the last flight on June 12th. And then the unthinkable happened. Knowing that Beijing controlled enough votes in the Legislative Council, protesters surrounded the complex earlier in the morning, successfully preventing lawmakers from convening. I was then serving my third jail sentence. For a moment, I wondered why the news channel was replaying footage of the umbrella movement, although it was not long before I realized Hong Kongers were back with even stronger determination. Lam suspended the bill on June 15, but fell short of fully withdrawing it. A historical 2 million people demonstrate the following day, equivalent to 1 in 4 out of our entire population. I'm not aware of anything comparable to this level of discontent against a government in modern history. I was released exactly 3 months ago, on June 17, and have since joined fellow Hong Kongers to protest in the most creative ways possible. In addition to the bill withdrawn, we demand Lam to retract label on us as rioters, drop all political charges, and conduct an independent investigation into police brutality. Some of us crowdfunded for newspaper advertisement ahead of the G20 summit in late June, calling for the world not to neglect Hong Kong. Others entered the Chamber of Legislative Council complex on July 1st. The same day, another 500,000 Hong Kongers protest peacefully. Crowds continue to show up in large number in the past 15 weekends, with small rallies taking place almost daily across the territories. But the government would not listen. Instead of diffusing the political crisis, it dramatically empowered the riot police. The movement reached a turning point on 21 of July. That night, pro-Beijing thugs with suspect ties to organized crime gathered in the Yuen Long train station and indiscriminately attacked not just protesters returning home, reporters on the scene, but even passers-by. The police refused to show up despite repeat emergency call, plunging Hong Kong into a police state with mob violence. On August 5th alone, the day Hong Kongers participate in a general strike, riot police shoot 800 canisters of tear gas to disperse the peaceful mass. Compare that to only 87 fire in the entire umbrella movement 5 years ago. The police's excessive force today is clear. Their excessive use of pepper spray, pepper balls, rubber bullets, beanbag rounds, and water cannons, almost all of which are imported from Western democracy, are no less troubling. In light of this, I applaud Chairman McGovern and Congressman Smith for introducing the Protect Hong Kong Act last week. Americans' company must not profit from the violence crackdown of freedom-loving Hong Kongers. Co-Chairman Rubio is also right for recently writing that Hong Kong's special status under American law depends on the city being treated as a separate customs area. Beijing should not have it both ways, wrapping all the economic benefit of Hong Kong's standing in the world while erosion of our freedom. This is the most important reason why the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act enjoys the broad support of Hong Kong civil society. Lam finally withdrew the bill earlier this month, but just as protesters have long stopped calling for her resignation, this decision was almost meaningless by now. The movement is far from over because it has long moved beyond one bill or one person. Our most important demand is genuine structural change in Hong Kong, which means free election. Our government's lack of representation lies at the heart of the matter. As I speak, Hong Kong is standing at a critical juncture. The stakes have never been higher. We are confronted by the huge Chinese military build-up just across the border in Shenzhen. President Xi Jinping is unlikely to take hardline action before the upcoming National Day in October. But no one can be sure what's next. Sending in the tanks remain irrational, but not impossible. With Chinese interference in Taiwan, Tibet, and especially Xinjiang, it serves as a reminder that Beijing is prepared to go far in pursuit of its grand imperial project. I was once the face of Hong Kong's youth activism. In this leaderless movement, my sacrifices are minimal compared to those among us who have been laid off of protesting, who have been injured but too afraid of even going to a hospital, or who have been forced to take their own life. Two have each lost an eye. The youngest of the 1,500 arrested so far is only 12 years old schoolboy. I don't know them personally, yet their pain is my pain. We belong to the same community, struggling for our right of self-determination, so we can build one brighter and common future. A child born today will not even have celebrated his or her 28th birthday by 2047, when the 50 years unchanged policy is set to expire. That deadline is closer to us than it appears. There's no return for us. Decades from now, when historians look back, I'm sure that 2019 will turn out to have been a watershed. I hope historians will celebrate the United States Congress for having stood on the side of Hong Kongers, the side of human rights and democracy. God bless Hong Kong. Thank you.
Ms. Ho, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman McGovern, Co-Chairman Rubio, and the members of this commission for holding this hearing and for having us here at this very critical moment for Hong Kong. For more than 100 days now, young people in Hong Kong have been at the forefront of our resistance. This is a leaderless movement with widespread participation from people of all walks of life. It is a fight for democracy, a fight for human rights, and most of all, a fight for universal values. What started in June as a 1 million people march has morphed into a struggle for fundamental political reform in Hong Kong. Chief Executive Carrie Lam's misjudgments and arrogance worsened the situation, resulting in a total clampdown of the Beijing government over Hong Kong's affairs. To date, more than 1,500 Hong Kongers, the youngest at the age of 12 years old, have been unreasonably arrested. Sadly, it has become a daily occurrence to see youngsters being pinned to the ground with head concussions, if not being knocked unconscious. On the other hand, riot police and plainclothes officers have since early on deliberately hidden their ID numbers and warrant cards, making it impossible for us to even certify their legitimacy, let alone hold them accountable. On August 21st, police from the Special Tactical Unit charged into Prince Edward MTR station, beating up passengers randomly. They then shut down the station for 24 hours, refusing medical care for those who were injured, raising even suspicions of possible deaths in the station. Separately, now they will be charging in secondary school yards,